Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about this Thomas King story in just a moment. He says he learned that he has no ties to Cherokee ancestry, as he has claimed throughout his career. And what I want you to pay attention to, as we have Kim Wheeler and Michelle Cyca on the show, I want you to pay attention to how hard the story is to talk about. I mean, Kim is going to talk about this feeling of, okay, I don't think I'm going to read Thomas King's books again, but also she's not going to throw them out either.
I'm definitely not going to burn them like I saw somebody do online yesterday.
This is a story that is not really easy to talk about, but I think this conversation is well worth your while. Let's get to it. Welcome back to Commotion, both of you.
Hi, thanks for having us back.
Yes, of
Thank
course.
you.
Yes, of course. Michelle, I'm going to start with you. This story broke in the Globe and Mail. At the same time, Thomas King published an op-ed in the Globe. Needless to say, that the combination kind of made headlines everywhere. Very briefly, for people who have not read both the news story and the essay, what is it that we actually learn here?
So in the essay and in the story, Thomas King reveals that he learned that he doesn't have a Cherokee ancestry, which he believed he had through his grandfather, Elvin Hunt, through a meeting with the Tribal Alliance Against Frauds, which is a group based in the United States, who has been doing investigations into people who claim to have Indigenous ancestry and publishing their results online. They do really thorough genealogical work. And so I guess they met with Thomas King and told him their findings, and he maybe decided that it would be good for him to share this news first before they published their report, and wrote this op-ed about his reaction and his feelings about it.
Kim, as Michelle sort of suggested there, there's something about this particular investigation, this group, that it did not come as a surprise to not everybody. I think some folks were sort of have already had that conversation. Wherefore, there's been some questions swirling around his identity for a minute. When did you first become aware of these sort of suspicions and questions, and what did you make of them initially?
I think I first started hearing the whispers probably about a decade ago, maybe a bit longer. And of course, I don't even think the word pretendian had been invented yet at that point. So it was kind of just like, oh, yeah, they're just going after him because he's doing so well. And it was that whole crabs in the bucket mentality that I thought. But then those whispers got louder and more people were saying them and academics were saying them. And I was like, okay, there's obviously something here. But then when the Cherokee themselves come forward and say, he's not on our rolls, then okay, something really is going on, and why isn't it being addressed? Like, why, if Thomas King knew that years ago, how come he didn't address it then?
That I want to just sit with that for a moment, this idea of not just whispers for a decade, but also whispers that get louder over time, because I think those are instructive as we sort of have this conversation. But Michelle, what did you think as you were reading Thomas King's essay about this whole thing?
I mean, I thought it was a very well-written essay. He's a very popular writer for good reason.
He's an excellent writer,
He's an excellent writer. It's really moving. But I thought he's 82 years old as he writes. And the Cherokee have incredible genealogical records. Claiming to be Cherokee is basically a national pastime in the U.S. It's like the most popular Indigenous ancestry that people claim. Hundreds of thousands of people claim to be Cherokee.
This is a serious story, but I just want to also acknowledge that comment you just made Kim laugh there. Just a moment, the idea that claiming
like your great grandmother was my great grandmother was a Cherokee princess.
That's like everybody's favorite family story. Happy Thanksgiving to the Americans. I'm sure they're telling this story over the dinner table today. But so at any point in his life, he could have contacted the Cherokee tribes and given them his grandfather's name and asked for information. And I think it says something that he didn't do that he never tried to find out, like, who is my family? Who am I related to? Is this true? It's a family story that everybody in the U.S. has, and he had no more details than anyone else, no more credibility besides something his mom told him. So to see him frame it as total shock that the story isn't true, I just feel like, especially in this day and age, he's seen these kinds of stories again and again also of people having their Indigenous ancestry claims debunked. It's hard to take it at face value that he didn't have any of these suspicions, that he wasn't asking any of these questions. And if he really didn't try and find the answers, I think that suggests that he probably knew what those answers would be.
Okay, so in the essay, he says he discovered this from the Tribal Alliance Against Frauds, which is what you mentioned. They're an American Cherokee organization. And he said they sort of, was like, let me track down the source of these rumors because I've been hearing these rumors and they're still kind of going on. He said he wrote to them in October and asked to talk to someone there. And then about a month later, he got a call, and that's where they sort of gave him the rest of the details. It's worth noting that in the piece, he sort of links to the rumors, but the link to their website is actually not a link to a rumor. It's a link to a genealogical sort of chart that goes back to the 1700s that found no Cherokee ancestry in his background. So it didn't appear like he was linking to a rumor when he was sort of like even in that essay that he wrote. Michelle, he admits in the Globe and Mail that he's received financial grants and benefits tied to his Indigenous ancestry over the years. Though as of now, he said the only one that he intends to return is his National Aboriginal Achievement Award for Arts and Culture, which he got in 2003. Also, at the end of this piece, he says he's just waiting to receive his quote-unquote scorching and sort through the rubble to see if there's anything left in my reputation. That's quite a conclusion. How did that sit with you?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. I mean, first of all, I'd like to say as a fact check too, like as Kim mentioned, I think people have been asking about this for a decade. So Tribal Alliance Against Frauds is a pretty new group. I think they've only been publishing investigations for a couple of years. So I would say they can't be the source of these rumors. These rumors predate Tribal Alliance Against Frauds. In terms of his statement, I mean, I think, Thomas King was like the Indigenous author for decades. His books are on so many high school reading lists, college reading lists. He, for so many Canadians, was their entry point to Indigenous voices and Indigenous writing.
Yeah.
To act like his career success can be totally disentangled from his claim to being a Cherokee writer, I think would be really difficult to substantiate. He says his awards have nothing to do with that. And certainly, his awards reflect the quality of his writing, but he received support and attention and interest and acclaim in part because of who he claimed to be. And, when he says it's all over for him, I just think you look around at the fallout for people who have been outed as pretendians, and there is certainly embarrassment, but there is no material consequences almost ever, right? I mean, Buffy Sainte-Marie has had a couple awards rescinded, but if you look at why, for instance, the Junos or Polaris rescinded her awards, they say it's because she's actually American and not Canadian. They don't touch the identity piece. Nobody has to pay back money. People very rarely even get fired, even if it seems as though they've lied deliberately. He's not going to go to jail. People are still going to love him and read him. I saw the comments on that Globe article are largely sympathetic to people who say like, wow, what a sad thing to learn.
Yeah.
So I have trouble reconciling this self-pitying tone there with the reality, which is that I think nothing is going to happen to him.
The through. Are you right about the comments? I was also looking through the comments under his essay, and quite a few are saying, "Hey, thanks for sharing this, Thomas." And that sort of seems to be how that essay is received. Kim, it's worth noting that in his Globe essay, Thomas writes, "The thing I hate the most is to be thought that I'm dishonest," and he claims he's never intentionally deceived anybody. How does that claim land for you?
Well, after hearing what Michelle said and obviously reading the Globe piece and reading all the comments on my social media,
Sure.
people are really angry. And they do feel deceived. But there are also a lot of people who knew and listened to those whispers. For me, I think, was he dishonest? Yes, definitely. Did he lie about it? I'm kind of on the fence about that one. Just because, did he all this time, did he know he was not Cherokee and he pretended he was, and he, did all this great work and got published and got recognized and took up those spaces away from legitimate Indigenous people? Or, it's so confusing. Like you mentioned Buffy Sainte-Marie, the same thing. Like, did she know? But did they also make space at the same time as taking up space.
Hmm.
Like this argument just, it goes on and on and on. And I don't think like we're anywhere near the end of it at the moment.
I hear that. I hear the conflict in your voice, Kim. I hear the conflict in your voice, and the idea that like these are significant figures who not only mean a lot, but they also sometimes can create a lot of space and open a lot of doors. And then you kind of are left in their wake to say they created something that wasn't there, and now we have to sort of reckon with this part of the story and how this sort of informs everything else. And that's not to say that any of this is going to be resolved anytime soon, or in a half hour on the radio. But Michelle, like you've done a lot of reporting on the string of sort of pretending allegations. But if we just zoom out for just a moment, what does this story tell you about who's given the platform to speak for Indigenous people?
I have two takeaways. I mean, one is that I think Canada loves to latch onto like one person as the Indigenous voice for whatever.
Hmm.
Buffy was our Indigenous musician. Thomas King, in many ways, was our like national Indigenous writer. Their work was really popular, and I think it's worth interrogating if some of that popularity is because it reflected this idea of being Indigenous that wasn't based in anything real, that felt kind of like a pan-Indigenous like performance that maybe reflected stereotypes or ideas that Thomas King or Buffy St. Marie drew on when constructing their idea of what being Indigenous meant in the
Hmm.
absence of family or community or culture, and how that meets the expectations of a country where people have very little lived experience or awareness of what Indigenous people and Indigenous cultures are like.
Hmm.
But the other thing it tells me that maybe is like a positive change is, if someone were to emerge today on the scene as a writer calling themselves Indigenous, and their personal story was, my mom told me my grandfather was Cherokee and I've never looked into it. I've never checked. I don't know him,
Hmm.
but I'm totally confident in my heart that it's true. I don't think people would take that at face value the same way. I think this is, for better or for worse, there is more awareness of how widespread these false claims are. And I think it's kind of astonishing in retrospect that that was the entire basis of Thomas King's identity, which he
Hmm.
built a very successful career on. That can't happen anymore, I think, because people know, if someone says they're Cherokee and all they have is this family rumor, it's probably worth checking that rumor before you start giving them awards for being such a great Indigenous writer.
There's no world in which this conversation is done. We're going to keep talking about this. We're actually going to talk about this some more on Friday's show. But I want to give each of you an opportunity to say the thing that remains is always the work, right? The thing that remains is sort of Thomas King has got a body of work. That work has been celebrated in different ways. What's the thing that should happen to the work now? What do you do to the work now? How does your relationship to the work change now? Maybe Kim, I'll start with you on this one.
Well, I think it's going to be different for everyone. For me, I have read several of his books. I probably won't ever reread his books.
Hmm.
Am I going to throw them away? Probably not. I'm definitely not going to burn them like I saw somebody do online
Oof.
yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think he'll ever be used and quoted in academic work anymore, but he'll still always have an audience.
Hmm.
And what he does with those royalties, because that's another conversation, like he should pay that back. I mean, maybe he donates some of that.
Mm-hmm.
But then who wants an award in Thomas King's name after this?
I mean, we have accounts, right, of Michelle, of schools that have sort of changed their history text to sort of include the inconvenient Indian as like a part of their how they teach history, right? Like the question really is now, you've got this work that's been embedded widely in culture, and then you got to ask, what's the thing that you got to do with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think at least now there is a really rich body of Indigenous writing, fiction, nonfiction that can replace that Thomas King. I do think, like Kim said, people are still going to read his work, but I don't think it should be used to teach students and young people about Indigenous lives. That would be, a misrepresentation. I certainly think it might be interesting to read now through the lens of understanding. The shift in his identity and his family history. But there are so many incredible writers who are publishing books about Indigenous lives, Indigenous history, Indigenous cultures, and communities that I think there is lots to replace Thomas King on those reading lists.
I think that is a good place for us to leave it here, but obviously we are not done with this conversation. But I just thought this would be a really good place to start. So I really appreciate your time and your energy. Thank you to both of you for being here.
Thank you so much.
Yes, of course. Michelle Cyca is a journalist and a member of the Muskeg Cree Nation based in Vancouver. Kim Wheeler is an Anishinaabe Mohawk writer and producer based in Winnipeg. We are going to continue talking about this story. We're actually going to do that on Friday. I'll be speaking with writer Jesse Wente, who's a regular on our show. He co-produced a screen adaptation of Thomas King's best-selling book, The Inconvenient Indian. For more on the story, you can always go to cbcnews.ca.